I think you can see what we're talking about this morning. Open up your Bible to Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We begin chapter 1 with a story of Daniel and how he said, I refuse to let Nebuchadnezzar or the Babylonians take credit for who or what I am and for anything I accomplish. That credit is going to go to God. And I'm not going to eat their food, and even though they can put me in whatever school they want, they can take me away from the land if they want, they can give me new names if they want, I can't stop them. I can do something about what I eat, and God gave him success in that and leniency in that way, and so he said, I'm going to not eat the king's food, I'm going to eat the veggies in the water, and I'm going to show everybody that what I am and what I become is not because of what Nebuchadnezzar does. Then in chapter 2, we see that Daniel is either in school or fresh out of school, and Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And Daniel is able to tell the king what his dream is and then also interpret it. And Nebuchadnezzar is absolutely dumbfounded and shocked. He says, nobody has ever been able to do this. This is amazing. He said, truly the spirit of the gods is in you. And it's kind of, insightful the way he says that. You can tell he's not a one true God worshiper at this point, right? But he acknowledges that Daniel's God is a great God and that he has amazing insights and he can proclaim mysteries that nobody else can proclaim. And that brings us to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, of course, is the story of the fiery furnace. We get to see another encounter here between God and Nebuchadnezzar. Like I said, we ended up in chapter 2, and where Nebuchadnezzar makes a statement like this, and this is paraphrased and condensed. He says, God is a revealer of mysteries and is to be honored. That's Nebuchadnezzar in year 2 of his reign. We open up chapter 3 with this statement. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. And again, already my mind starts going with questions. And the main question is, well, two questions. One, I wish that there was a timestamp here. God doesn't give us one. And Nebuchadnezzar reigned for a long time, and I don't know really what time frame this took place in. The commentators I read, they kind of speculate and guess that maybe it was 10 to 15 years later after chapter 2. Again, nobody gives any definitive reason why they think that. So as far as I know, that's just a pure speculative guess. They think maybe it was around the time that Nebuchadnezzar finally destroyed Jerusalem once and for all and burned down the city. Again, we don't really know for sure. But the other question that comes to my mind is what happened to chapter 2? I mean, at the end of chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar was completely overwhelmed and in awe of this God of Daniel. And by chapter 3, it's almost like chapter 2 had never occurred. And I think, wait a minute, what happened? Where's the disconnect here? Why is Nebuchadnezzar so, he's back off building golden images and worshiping them, and he doesn't respect the God of Israel again by the end of the chapter. You probably know the story well enough to know where that's headed. And I think, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? I thought God already showed himself to him. What's going on? And I came up with a couple possibilities. Again, Bible doesn't say for sure. Maybe it was the time period between events, right? 10, 15 years. And it's easy for us to look back and say, well, the dummy, the moron, how many times does God have to prove himself to him? And I think, wait a minute, dummy, moron, how many times do I forget and I know better? And I do silly things and I don't pay attention, I don't obey the way I should, and I lose focus of who he is and I don't trust the way I should. How many times has he shown me, and how many times do I still forget? And it usually doesn't take me 10 to 15 years. You know what I'm saying? So maybe it's just the time span between the two, and Nebuchadnezzar is a wicked person like all of us are. And maybe he got, again, so full of himself and so much success, and he kind of forgot who God was, and he turned away and he's back to worshiping his idols. Look at the history of Israel. They did this countless times over the centuries. And again, just like we often do every day in our lives. So maybe it was the time stamp, or the time gap between. Also, maybe it was the way that Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged God in the end of chapter 2, right? What did he say? Did he say, the God of Israel is the one and only true God. For him forever will I only serve. And he's the only true God, and all my other idols are junk. He didn't really say that, really. He acknowledged the God of Daniel as being insightful and a revealer of mysteries. But I don't think he quite came to the place that we would consider him, that we wanted to be verse 47, chapter 2, truly your God is a God of gods and Lord of kings. Of all the gods, your God he's way up there, right? Now, did he disavow his own gods? Technically, no, not really. A Lord of kings, revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. And then it talks about how Nebuchadnezzar promoted Daniel. But that's all he says. Your God he's a big one. He's a strong one. He's way up there on my list. And he's smart. He knows how to reveal mysteries. He has insights. But that's all he says. And he kind of stops short of what we monotheistic people would think, right? We say there is only one true God. All the others are false. He's the only one to be worshipped. And because of that, we read chapter 3 and say, wait a minute, Nebuchadnezzar, what's wrong with you? Well, what's wrong with him is he was probably still polytheistic, right? He had a whole set of gods that he worshipped. The Babylonian gods, how many other gods of all the countries that he captured had their own belief systems? And what did he do with those gods? Maybe he adopted them into his fold as well so that he could have as many gods protecting him and giving him success as he could. In fact, I suspect that kind of plays into the story that we see today. But probably that's what's going on. He acknowledges in chapter 2 that the God of Daniel is very insightful. He's very, very knowledgeable. He can reveal mysteries. So I'm going to honor this God as well. So get to chapter 3. And I think maybe that's why there seems to be, at least on the surface, no memory of chapter 2. Maybe there is a memory of chapter 2, but his insights and his conclusions are incomplete, which is why God has to confront him again in chapter 3. So, chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 say this. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth 6 cubits. Conversion into English, cubit being about 1.5 feet, that's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Super, super tall and kind of skinny in proportion. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces. Who was that again? Basically everybody in governmental administration, right? Oh, everybody from all the provinces. How many provinces? All of them, but I mean that's a lot of them, right? So he's gathering up everybody from his empire, all the leaders, the political leaders, and say, we're going to have a rally here in the desert. Okay, keep that in mind. All the officials of provinces, verse 3, gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, from all over the Babylonian world, everybody that had come, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, except probably accordion, because nobody would bow down to that, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So we have the great big convention. Nebuchadnezzar calls in all of his subordinates in governmental leadership. He says, you're going to meet outside of Babylon in this place I've designated, and we're going to have a massive rally. And they go out to this rally site, and there's a huge image. The image of who? I think I heard somebody whisper it on camera. Sorry, you're left out. I've always pictured it. Here's what we have. We have this 90-foot tall, kind of skinny, almost emaciated looking, because it's only 9 feet wide, but 90 feet tall. Guy got to put some meat on his bones or something. But a super tall, super skinny statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar says, I am so full of myself, everyone, that I've constructed an image of myself in the desert, and you are all to come and bow down to the statue of me. Technically, in the passage, as you read it, what does it say the image of was of? Take a look. Technically doesn't say, does it? It doesn't say he made a statue of himself. It says he made a golden image. So he made a golden image. In fact, as I was reading and kind of looking through different ideas and stuff, I suspect, my personal opinion, Bible doesn't say, probably it looked maybe something more like this. If I had to guess, again, strictly a guess, probably the whole thing wasn't statue, not that that's particularly relevant to the story, but probably a super tall display, 90 feet tall, 60 cubits, super skinny, which is what makes me think it may be on a pedestal, but with this image on the top. If I had to, again, guess, I would probably say that the image wasn't a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Probably it was of one of his gods, either his war god or his chief master god. Again, the Bible doesn't say what the image was. But here's kind of what I think is going on. Nebuchadnezzar says, we need to have a unification meeting here. I need to make sure all of my subordinates are on board. So I'm going to call them together, and I'm going to make sure that they are all loyal to me and to my kingdom. And so I'm going to set up the Babylonian god here that gives us our success in war, in military might, and strategy, whichever god that was that would have symbolized that. And we're all going to meet, all of my advisors, all of my trusted officials, the governors, everybody that I need to be politically loyal to me to maintain my empire, my kingdom. And we're all going to meet out here in the desert, and I'm going to test and make them demonstrate their loyalty in a very physical and obvious way to me, so that when I play music, which it probably had to be music because they were all different languages and stuff, right? And that's one thing they can all recognize. When I play this music, everybody bows down to the god of the Babylonians. Not their god, is to my God, because my God is in charge, which puts me in charge, which means that they are loyal to me and they do things my way. So the question is this really a religious ceremony, or is it more of a political rally? I suspect it was probably both. And let me give you just a picture here, and I need everybody to look at me and understand the illustration I'm going to use yet next. I'm not equating to idol worship necessarily, okay? It's just a fun illustration. You ready? Everybody okay? You ready? Everybody's going, huh? What's going on? They can't wait to hear what I say next, how I get myself in trouble. All right, here we go. Let's say that you are a high school sports fan, and your favorite high school is holding a pep rally. And everybody's there, and everybody's excited, and everybody's worked up. Oh, go team, go, yay, rah, yay. And everybody's in the bleachers, and they're at the football field there, and they're just having you know what a pep rally is. It's a big, emotional, exciting event, and everybody's there, and everybody's cheering for the team. And out on the field, in front of the whole stands and the whole stadium, comes the team mascot. Let's say, I don't know, arbitrarily, say it's a Black Panther, okay? And the panther comes out on the field, right? This Black Panther walks out on the field. Of course, it's a guy dressed up in a suit. We all know this. And everybody does what? Everybody goes nuts. Yeah, it's our mascot. Woo! Go. Hypothetically, let's make up a name. Northwood High School, all right? Arbitrary name. Northwood High School, and out comes this Black Panther onto the field, and everybody's cheering in unison. Oh yeah, go Panthers, go Panthers! Now, when the football game takes place, does anybody really think that there are Panthers on the field? No. Does anybody really think at the high school football game that this guy in the Panther outfit somehow gives them power to win a game? No, probably not. So why are we cheering for the Panther? He doesn't do anything except for prance around out on the field and then go back behind the stands. Why do we cheer for the Panther? Come on, you know the answer. Help me out here. He's a mascot, right? And by cheering for the Panther, I am, by extension, cheering for this hypothetical high school team, which we will call Northwood, right? I'm cheering for the Northwood team by celebrating the Panther, right? Now, walk onto the field all the coaches, and they're having a great time. And you have the head coach, and you have multiple, under coaches. You have the offensive coach and the defensive coach and this coach and that coach. Assistant coaches, and they all walk out on the field, and they're all, team colors and jerseys and helmets and whatever it is. They do little flags and stuff, and they're all wearing, pick colors, say black and red, okay? They're all wearing black and red, and they walk out onto the field. And it's a big pep rally, and everybody's cheering. And all of a sudden, you see 3 of the coaches walk out, and they're not wearing black and red. They're wearing yellow and green. I know who's headed to the furnace. And they walk out in front of all the people, and everybody is wearing black and red except for these 3 subordinate coaches, and they're wearing yellow and green. And all of a sudden, the head coach happens to look over and see these 3 guys, and he is mortified. Here is everybody. We're having a unifying rally to cheer on the Panther. Everybody decided we're trying to get pepped up for the team, and these yahoos are standing in front of the crowd, and they're doing what? And so the head coach walks over to them and say, "That's a good shade of green. That looks nice on you today." What does he say? Come on, what does he say? He is what? He is ticked. What are you guys doing? This is a pep rally for Northwood High School. Panthers, black and red, everybody knows this. Now you're my assistant coaches. You're supposed to be setting the example, and you're making me look like an idiot and yourselves look like an idiot because you're wearing the wrong colors for, I don't know, hypothetically, whatever team may wear, say, yellow and green. You had better shape up because you're here to support me and the team, and you're not doing that, right? You better go change right now and get back out on the field. And those 3 guys, those 3 subordinate coaches, look at the head coach and they say, "Sir, we don't really have to answer you concerning this matter, but we will not be changing into black and red, and we will not be cheering for the Panther today." And the head coach says what? Bye-bye. You're no longer a coach here at this hypothetical Northwood High School. Change the situation just a little bit. Nebuchadnezzar is in the desert. He's called all of his leading authorities and his governmental leaders from all over the empire to hold a political rally worshiping the symbolic god of the Babylonian Empire. Whether they believe in this god or not is kind of irrelevant because they are here to pledge their loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar and to his leadership. And he says, when you hear the music play, everybody bows down and worships that image. So the music starts to play, and 3 of his leading men who are stationed right there in the capital, who have high-ranking authority in his administration, do what? Now, was Nebuchadnezzar just having a fit of hyper-egotism because they wouldn't bow down to his statue, or was it maybe a little bit more than that? I think we can kind of see where Nebuchadnezzar is coming from here. Now, at a high school football game, nobody's worshiping, right? And everybody knows the Panther's just a little guy flouncing around in a costume, and it's all fun and games. In this situation, it was bowing down and worshiping, and that's a little bit bigger problem, which is where we come into the conflict, okay? With that in mind, let's continue reading the story. Chapter 3, verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. That's an interesting statement. It sounds like they're trying to get in trouble more than just these 3 guys, but they're using 3 guys as a means to get to a larger group. That's interesting. Where do you think that comes from? Boy, there's another lesson altogether. We won't go into that entirely, but it makes you wonder, is there still maybe some resentment possibly from what happened in chapter 2? Remember in chapter 2 I said these guys are fresh out of school. They completely showed up all of the senior members of Nebuchadnezzar's administration and his advisors. Nebuchadnezzar puts these young little pipsqueak, these high school seniors, over in charge in the highest positions of all the other guys. And all the other guys say what? Grrr. Now we come to chapter 3, and they see an opportunity. Is it carryover from chapter 2? Perhaps. Is it just general hatred of the Jews for spiritual reasons? Perhaps. Is it both? Probably. But they see their opportunity. They maliciously accuse the Jews. They declared, verse 9, to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, blah, 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 of every kind of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? So here they go. They accuse these guys. They say, we see an opportunity here to possibly promote ourselves, to take these guys down. Whatever their specific motivation was, they went to the king and called out. And it says they maliciously accused. They did this to get these guys into trouble. Because apparently Nebuchadnezzar hadn't noticed before this. I'm not exactly sure how that played out, but for whatever reason he wasn't aware. So they brought this to the king's attention just to get them in trouble. And they say, King, you set these guys up in charge in your own province in a very high position of authority. And do you know what they are doing? They are not cheering for your panther. And they are not wearing the right colors. They refuse to bow down to the image. And not only are they refusing, and they are being disloyal to you, but they're being a bad example to everybody else. And you know what probably everybody else is going to start doing? They're going to question your leadership abilities, Nebuchadnezzar, because you're the one that put them in charge. What are you going to do about it? Well, Nebuchadnezzar was not real pleased with this. Verse 13, a furious rage, he said. Nebuchadnezzar was furious. He was mad. And again, given the football analogy, I think we can kind of understand that a little bit. Again, Nebuchadnezzar, still a pagan, still polytheistic, still probably worshiping his own gods, as obviously as we can see from what's going on here. And he feels not only religiously threatened and insulted, but personally insulted and threatened, politically insulted and threatened, and he is not going to have any of this. Continue reading in verse 16, if I can find 16. Oh, I'm sorry, not 16. Let's go back to 14. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, worship the image I have set up? Verse 15, Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, and all the other music, to fall down and worship the image I have made, well and good. He even gives them a second chance here. He is furious. I've heard teachers say, well, he really didn't want to hurt him, but he's given him a second chance. Sorry, 13 says he's furious. He's mad. But he still gives him a second chance. If you're ready to comply now, fine. We'll forget this thing. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? How is that for a setup? What in the world, God, do you think you can save you then when I throw you into a furnace? Now again, what happened to chapter 2? I thought we've already seen God's power demonstrated in Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. Again, I'm trying to put myself into the mind of a polytheist here, where you have a God of this, and a God of that, and a God of this, and a God of that. In chapter 2, God was the God of what? Be honest here. I mean, put yourself in the polytheist mind here. You have lots of gods. What is chapter 2 God of Daniel the God of? I'm sorry, a little bit louder. I couldn't quite catch it. Mysteries and insights, right? This is the brainy God. The God of Daniel. He's the brainy God. He can have insights and mysteries. We don't know anything about his power or his authority or any of that other stuff right now. Right now, the God of Daniel and the Jews, still the brainy God, the God of insights and mysteries. Okay? So I think it makes sense by the time we get down to verse 15, where he says, if you don't worship, you're thrown into the furnace. And who is the God who can deliver you out of my hands? For that, you need a God of power, not just brains. You can have a super smart God, but he can be really wimpy, okay? And so we know the God of the Jews, he's smart, but who's going to rescue you out of my hands when I throw you into the furnace? Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. And Nebuchadnezzar says, what? I can only imagine what his response is. We don't have to answer you, sir. Verse 17, If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Verse 18, I love this part. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And I don't think they're trying to be smart or snappy or snarky here to the king. I really don't. But I think they realize that they are at a complete impasse and they're headed to the furnace. Because we cannot worship and you will not back down. We are at a stalemate until we get burned up. And so I think they're just saying, King, look, you made your decree and we've taken our stand. Neither side is going to compromise here, so discussion is kind of irrelevant. But I just want you to know that the God you're talking about, he is absolutely able to save us. Verse 18, but if not, be it known to you that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you set up. And I love that part because it shows that they had no idea if God was going to step in and miraculously save them or not. They didn't know. And I think that's a little bit more applicable to us today, and I'll get to that in just a second. But they didn't really know if God was going to sweep in. But they said, we are willing to sacrifice ourselves. Whether he saves us or not, we're not going to back down. And we might end up crispy like a bacon on the inside of that furnace. But I'm sorry, King, we just cannot do this. He can save us. We know he can. We know our Jewish history. We know our, coming out of Egypt and plagues and Red Sea and provision and manna and all that kind of stuff, miracle after miracle. We know he can do it. But will he do it? We don't know. We don't know if he will step in and save us. Last time, just as kind of a side note here, last time I went through Daniel, I think it was actually Mike McGowan who came up after the lesson, and he told me about a historical event that I was unaware of, and I looked it up and verified and reread, and sure enough, it's true. I just for fun, I want to read this account to you. This comes from albertnorton.com. I have no idea who this guy is. And you can find this story on any number of websites. This isn't an endorsement of Albert Norton. Sorry, Al. I just don't know who you are and what your site is about, other than it had a good, concise retelling of this story. In 1940, when France fell, the Nazis had about 350,000 British soldiers trapped at a beach at Dunkirk. The situation was dire because they were completely surrounded by Nazi soldiers on three sides and the English Channel on the other. There was no military naval rescue possible. The commander wanted to relay a message to the naval authorities in Britain to let them know that the situation was dire, but didn't want to give away too much information that the Nazis could intercept, nor deliver a message to his countrymen that seemed hopeless. So the commander chose to cable three small words, but if not. And those were his only words. The British Navy responded by putting out a call to the owners of small private watercraft. Many of the boats were commandeered, but that effort was overtaken largely by uncoordinated volunteers coming forward in their boats and manning the boats themselves. Many hundreds of little boats. They crossed the channel to rescue as many of the British soldiers as they could. For some reason, probably because Hitler overmanaged his army and often did so poorly, the Nazis hesitated outside of Dunkirk. The result was that instead of having one day to save a few thousand men, the boats were able to make repeated trips until 338,000 British soldiers were safely delivered to Britain, while the Royal Air Force held back the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. This was the Dunkirk miracle. My friend told me these words, but if not, but it didn't register with me at first. I was trying to place them in some sort of recent historical context, racking my brain for something perhaps that Churchill had said previously. He gave me a minute to try the reference before explaining that it was from the story of the fiery furnace in the book of Daniel. And the people in that day were apparently biblically literate enough so that they heard these three words, but if not, and somehow in their minds they popped back to Daniel chapter 3, and they got the message of the story. And they said, in which the military was saying, it is looking pretty hopeless, and God can save us if he wishes to, but if not, this is where we die, taking our stand. And they coordinated a rescue effort, and sure enough, with God providentially slowing Hitler down just enough to save all these guys off the beach and get them back to England. Kind of a side story, not not entirely what it's about, but the concept is the same. If not, these guys didn't know if they were going to be rescued out of Nebuchadnezzar's hand or if they would die. Take a look at this. Oh, sorry. Who's the God that can save you out of my hands? I get so wrapped up I forget to click. Take a look at this. This is a list of people in the Bible that God had rescued. Think about Moses. Saved him from infanticide in Egypt by putting him in a little reed boat, and the Pharaoh's daughter brought him out. Saved him from being executed after he killed a Egyptian soldier. He ran away to the desert. God saved his life again by bringing him to the well of Midian. He grew up as a shepherd, brought him back to Egypt, kept him safe from Pharaoh and everything that he was involved with there. Of course, Moses led the children of Israel out after all the plagues through the Red Sea. Miraculous savings and demonstrations of power. Daniel, of course, we will read in a couple chapters how Daniel, his life was repeatedly saved by God. Joshua and the Israelites, miracle after miracle, salvation after salvation for the Israelites as they went into enemy Canaanite territory after they'd wandered through the wilderness, being fed by God and protected by God from all the other armies that wanted to destroy them. Think about Gideon, who was under the Midianite oppression, and God rounded up an army for him and then whittled it down to 300. And God ran him into camp in midnight and just gave him total victory over this huge, massive army with a piddly little 300-man infantry. David, how many stories could we tell about David when God swooped in and saved David, saved his life, protected him, kept him safe from Saul, kept him safe from Goliath, kept him safe from Absalom. On and on and on we can tell about the care and the miraculous savings that God gave to David. Peter, saved from prison, who knows how many times God protected Peter and kept him safe and allowed him to continue to minister. Jerusalem from the Assyrians, I'm thinking back in Hezekiah's day, right? When the Assyrians are outside the wall and they've wiped out most of the rest of the nation, and just Jerusalem is left. And Hezekiah takes this note of taunt in from the enemy, takes it in before God and spreads it out and says, look what these people are saying to you. Please save us. For your name's sake, please save us. And God's angel just comes down and wipes out the Assyrian army overnight, and there's nobody left. And it's amazing. And God swoops in in enormous displays of power and just decimates the enemy and saves his people. And the Bible has a lot of stories like that where God comes and rescues his people. And this is certainly no different, right? The guys that go into the furnace and they walk out unharmed. But that's not always the story, right? For this list that we have here, we could easily write an equally long list or more of people that God chose not to rescue. Think of John the Baptist. Can you imagine John the Baptist? He's here proclaiming the message of the Messiah. The Messiah is, I was going to look this up this morning, was it second cousins to Jesus? Elizabeth and Mary were first cousins. Am I thinking that right? For some reason I have a brain block. I think so. That'd make them cousins. Relation, anyway. They're fairly close relation. And there's John the Baptist, and he gets arrested and put in jail by Herod. And Jesus is out ministering, and he's healing the sick, and he's raising the dead, and doing all kinds of miraculous signs, feeding and walking on water and all this kind of stuff. And there's this John the Baptist in jail. And you wonder what John the Baptist is thinking. So I know this guy has the power to get me out anytime he wants to. Maybe he's waiting until he ascends to the throne to take his rightful rule and his rightful reign. Then he will set me, the political prisoner, free. And so I'll just sit here and wait it out until that happens. And he waits and he waits, and he sends his disciples to Jesus and says, no disrespect, but are you the one we're waiting for, or should we look for somebody else here? Because I'm kind of getting tired of jail food, and I'm getting a little nervous. Well, days go by and weeks go by, and finally Herod's daughter or stepdaughter, or whatever you want to call it, who has very little principles but some amazing dance moves, puts on a show for Herod. And Herod says, that was super neat. I'll give you whatever you want. And she runs back to Mommy and says, what? What should I ask for? And Mommy says, ask for the head of John the Baptist. And the guards run down and they open the jail cell, and John says, this is it. I'm getting out. And they say, yeah, you're getting out all right, in 2 different pieces. And off goes his head. And there was no miraculous rescue. There was no display of power. And John loses his life, and his head goes up on a silver plate to be handed to the king. And his body goes out a different way. You think that was hard for Jesus to walk around knowing he had the power to save his cousin and didn't do so? Do you think it was hard for John the Baptist, knowing that he's in the right and that the Messiah is here, and here he is in jail, and then he loses his life? What about John's disciples? How was that for discouragement when there was no rescue? What about the martyred apostles? Again, most of the apostles, the Bible doesn't tell us how they died. I think James says killed by the sword. The rest of them we have to rely on tradition, but according to tradition, all but one was martyred and killed. And again, there was no miraculous rescue. God allowed them to die at the hands of their persecutors. What about Isaiah? He was killed. I think tradition says sawn in half, whatever it was, martyred. A lot of the prophets, right? Jesus talks about the prophet. In fact, the next two, I'm reading through the Gospels on my own reading, and Jesus, in conversation with the Pharisees, says, "You hypocrites, you lies, your forefathers, they executed and they persecuted all the prophets before them." This was a common thing, apparently, for the prophets of God. They come down, they give their message, they're persecuted, beaten, and or killed. And that's kind of the way your life goes if you're designated to be a prophet. He says, from Abel to Zechariah is what Jesus says. Abel, of course, and Adam and Eve's kid who was killed by Cain, all the way through to Zechariah. And I don't know that Jesus was saying Zechariah was the last, but I wonder if he's not kind of going more alphabetical order, right? A to Z, the complete list. Abel to Zechariah and everybody in between. Everybody that's been persecuted and killed for the faith. He says, you're right there with those who killed the prophets. But again, all those prophets, all the miraculous things they did, all the messages they carried for God, all the service they gave to Him and their loyalty and faithfulness, and God never stepped in to rescue them, rescue their lives. I mean, maybe occasionally they did, but in the end, He did not. What about Stephen? Stephen, a member of the early church, an excellent testimony, serving God, doing what he could for the believers, and he gets rounded up for his faith. He stands before the Sanhedrin and gives an amazing testimony of the history of Israel and what God has done and how He's come to save them. And they take him out back and they pick up stones and they start throwing him. And at that point, you just want God to put in some force field or something to keep those stones out, and Stephen to jump up and walk away through the crowd. But the force field never comes, and the stones keep throwing. And Stephen dies, and there is no rescue. If you read Fox's Book of Martyrs, the Martyrs doesn't stop at the end of the Bible times. It keeps going throughout history. I've read part of it. I didn't read all of it. I couldn't read. It's a hard book to read, a really hard book to read, because it's full of people who gave their lives with no miraculous rescue. And I say that not to be a discouragement or, again, to even call into question God's ability to save, because we know He can. The list on the left demonstrates that. But sometimes He chooses to do so, and sometimes He does not. And these guys didn't know which list they would end up on. They didn't know if they'd end up on the left list or the right list. But they said, regardless, whether we are saved or not, we will not serve your God, Nebuchadnezzar. Continuing on with verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, as if he wasn't before, but now he's really mad. And the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than he usually heated. Why do you think that was? You think a regular fire couldn't kill them? In fact, I read some commentators saying he was just being illogical at this point, because if you want to torture the guys, you actually turn it down so they suffer longer, but he turned it up, so that shows that he was just out of his mind with irrational rage. I don't think that was it at all. Why do you think he turned it up 7 times hotter? He wanted to make an example of the guys wearing green and yellow to everybody else. Say, you better not show you're disloyal to me, because look what happens. And he turned it up so hot they could feel the blaze like a half a mile away. He was totally making an example of them. Verse 20, he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fire furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So hot it was. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, guys, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king. And he answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. And much to his surprise, he walks over, and I don't know what he expected to see, because clearly under normal circumstances the guys would not be standing up. They'd be flat in the ashes somewhere, toasted to a crisp. But he looks in the door for whatever reason, or port or window or whatever it was. And he looks in, and he not only sees piles of bodies, but he sees these guys standing up, walking around, and there's not 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sure he counted several times, 1, 2, 3, 4. And he says, I thought we threw in 3 guys, but there's 4 in there. And one of them, and I wish I knew what he saw that differentiated the one from the others. Sometimes I see why people write apocryphal books of Scripture, right? Because sometimes you just wish you had more detail and more story. But making up story doesn't do any good. Sorry, we'll just have to wait till we get there and we can ask God himself, I guess. But something about the fourth was different and recognizable. He said, that looks like a son of the gods. And he was probably more accurate than what he realized. Because while he was still thinking in polytheistic mode, whether an angel or the pre-incarnate Son of God, don't know for sure. I suspect maybe the latter. But he was walking around in there with him. And I kind of wonder what was going on in there while they were walking around. Were they talking? Or were they just kind of walking around saying, what do we do? We're kind of bored? I don't know. I kind of wish I knew what was going on in the fire. Someday we'll ask, and hopefully I'll get an answer. But he says, whatever's going on there, I don't know what's going on, but they're walking around. This should not be happening. Something crazy is going on. There's a fourth guy. We don't know where he came from, but he looks like something miraculous, something incredible. Verse 26. 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's counselors